Every year, on the same day, every civilized world in the galaxy sent a signal. It was a simple thing, a short pulse of code that meant nothing more than "We are here, we are listening, all is well." The Galactic Conclave had been doing this for over 400 years. It was as routine as breathing. Every world sent the signal. Every world received the others. It was the galaxy's way of saying good morning. On that particular Tuesday in the year 2247, something different happened. Jake Mercer was sitting at his station, inside the Central Relay Hub, a large underground facility buried beneath the flat plains of Colorado. He was a signals officer, not a particularly exciting job, not a particularly exciting man. He was 34 years old, medium height, brown hair, the kind of person you could sit next to on a train and forget about 10 minutes later. He drank black coffee. He wore the same type of plain gray uniform every day. He did his job, quietly, and he did it well. He was running the standard acknowledgement check when he noticed it. His screen showed the outgoing signal log. Every relay tower on Earth was supposed to fire a small confirmation burst at exactly 0600 hours. He watched the clock tick past 0600. He waited. He checked the log again. Nothing had gone out. He thought it was a software error at first. He ran a diagnostic. Clean. He checked the hardware status of every relay tower on the continent. All towers were online. All towers were functional. Not one of them had fired. He pulled up the global relay map. Every continent, every ocean platform, every orbital station, every single transmitter on and around planet Earth. All green, all active, all completely, deliberately silent. He sat back in his chair and stared at the screen for a long moment. Then he picked up his coffee, took a slow sip, and reached for the secure internal line to his supervisor. The line was already ringing before he touched it. His supervisor had noticed too. So had everyone else in the building. Within 6 hours, it became clear that this was not a malfunction. Every outgoing human transmission had stopped. Not just the conclave acknowledgement signal, everything. Diplomatic channels, trade communications, civilian broadcasts, navigational beacons shared with alien shipping routes. Every single piece of outgoing data from Earth and its colonies had gone dark, simultaneously, without any public announcement or explanation. At the same time, something else happened. Earth's orbital defense grid, which was normally kept at minimal power as a political gesture of goodwill, came fully online. It powered up slowly and quietly, the way a person might roll up their sleeves before a long job. Every human diplomatic ship in foreign space filed immediate requests to leave. Every human ambassador on alien stations requested emergency extraction. They gave no reasons. They simply packed, sent brief and polite goodbyes, and left. The galaxy noticed within 24 hours. In the grand halls of the Conclave headquarters, alien delegates began gathering around their communication terminals with confused and uneasy expressions. The Velhari sent 3 query messages to Earth's diplomatic office. They received no reply. The Sarathi Commerce Guild sent formal notification of a scheduled trade meeting. No reply. A conclave administrative clerk sent a routine form requiring a simple digital signature. No reply. Earth had simply stopped talking. Among all the species watching this unfold, the Drathari were the least concerned, at first. The Drathari were tall, gray-skinned, and ancient in the way that made them slow to take anything seriously that they had not invented themselves. They had been the dominant military power in the galaxy for 300 years. They had crushed 6 civilizations that had made the mistake of challenging them. They looked at humanity the way a person looks at a small dog that has wandered onto a busy street, with mild curiosity and no real worry. Ambassador Velkrath, the senior Drathari representative to the Conclave, sent a personal message to the office of Nina Carr, the Secretary General of the United Earth Government. The message was not diplomatic. It was not kind. It suggested, in plain language, that Earth's silence was the result of some kind of internal confusion, possibly incompetence, and that humanity should get its affairs in order before embarrassing itself further on the galactic stage. Nina Carr's office received the message. It was logged, time-stamped, and filed. No response was sent. That was when Velcrath went quiet himself. He had dealt with dozens of species over his long career. He had received silence from young, frightened worlds that did not know how to respond to Drothari pressure. He knew what that kind of silence felt like: nervous, fragile, full of hidden trembling. This was not that. There was nothing fragile in the human silence. It had a weight to it, a stillness, the way the air gets heavy just before a very large storm. He did not say this to anyone, but he stopped making jokes about humanity that day. On the other side of the conclave building, a junior Drothari intelligence officer named Orek was assigned to write a standard assessment report on Earth's behavior. It was supposed to take him an afternoon. He started, as required, with Earth's historical war archives, a file his department had not opened in over 20 years, because no one had considered it worth reading. He opened it expecting boredom. He found something else. He read about a war fought in the 20th century that killed over 70 million people. He read about a device that had been built in a desert in total secrecy, and then dropped on a city and erased it in seconds. He read about firebombing campaigns that turned entire cities to ash in a single night. He read about a doctrine called total war, a human concept that had no real equivalent in any other species' military tradition, which essentially meant that when humans decided a war needed to be won, they did not stop until there was nothing left to fight. He read for 11 hours without taking a break. He did not finish the report that afternoon. He did not finish it that evening. He sat alone at his desk, deep in the conclave building, reading file after file. And somewhere around midnight, he opened a formal transfer request to move himself off the Drothari frontline fleet and into an administrative posting. He did not explain why in the transfer request. He did not need to. Back in Colorado, Jake Mercer ended his shift, logged the day's events in a 3-line summary, and drove home under a wide, dark sky full of stars. He made dinner. He fed his dog. He went to bed. The silence continued. The galaxy kept watching, and not one human anywhere said a single word about what any of it meant. Drothari Imperial War College was not a school in the way most species understood schools. It was a floating fortress, a massive black structure drifting in high orbit above the Drothari homeworld, cold and silent and ancient. Its walls held the military history of 300 years of Drothari dominance. Its officers were the finest soldiers the Empire had ever produced. They had studied every known war, every known enemy, every known strategy in the galaxy. They had not studied humanity. Not seriously, not deeply, not until now. Commodore Droshek sat alone in his personal study aboard the flagship Endless Dominion and read. He was not young, but he was sharp. A careful, methodical officer who had won 3 major engagements through patience rather than aggression. His superiors sometimes found this quality irritating. Right now, that quality was the only reason he was taking the situation seriously, while everyone else in the fleet was still laughing. He had started with the basic military file on Earth. Standard numbers, population, fleet size, weapon classifications, territorial range. On paper, humanity was unremarkable. A mid-tier species with a modest fleet and no major combat experience against a Drothari-level force. His Emperor had looked at these numbers and felt nothing but confidence. Droshek looked past the numbers and into the history. He read about a place called Verdun, where 2 human nations spent 10 months killing each other in a patch of mud no larger than a small city, and neither side stopped. He read about a war in the Pacific where humans had fought island by island across an entire ocean for years, taking catastrophic losses on every beach, and kept going anyway. He read about a weapon program conducted in total secrecy by thousands of scientists working in the desert. A program that produced a device so powerful it ended a global war in 2 strikes. Then he read about something called the doctrine of unconditional surrender. Most species, when losing a war, negotiated. They found terms. They preserved something: dignity, territory, leadership. It was rational. It was civilized. Humans, in their largest conflicts, had sometimes refused to offer this option at all. They had fought until the enemy had nothing left, not as cruelty, as strategy, because they had learned, through their own brutal history, that a beaten enemy who kept a piece of their pride would eventually return. Droshek set down his reading tablet and stared at the wall for a long time. He thought about the 40 ships his emperor had ordered to Earth's border. He thought about them the way a person thinks about a friend who has just said something very foolish in front of the wrong person. On Earth, in a military planning room buried under the Nevada desert, a very different kind of meeting was taking place. Lena Ashford stood at the front of a long table, surrounded by generals, admirals, and intelligence directors. She was 31 years old and looked even younger, which meant that every person in the room had underestimated her at least once before learning not to. She was the chief military historian for Earth's War Council, and she had been asked to give a single briefing on one specific subject. The subject was, what does Earth's silence mean to an enemy watching from the outside? She did not use many slides. She did not need them. She explained it clearly and without drama. In every major conflict in human history, where a nation or alliance had gone suddenly and completely quiet before a war, stopped talking, stopped broadcasting, stopped engaging diplomatically, it had meant one thing. The planning was already done. The talking phase was over. The silence was not hesitation. It was the last step before action. She listed the historical examples. She gave dates, outcomes, casualty figures. She spoke for 40 minutes. The room was completely still the entire time. When she finished, she looked around the table and said one more thing. She said that an outside observer, watching Earth go silent right now, any observer who had done the reading, would understand exactly what it signaled. And if they were smart, that knowledge alone might be enough to make them reconsider whatever they were planning. General Cole Briggs, who had been sitting at the far end of the table with his arms crossed and his expression unreadable for the entire briefing, spoke for the first time. He asked Lena a single question. He asked whether, in her historical analysis, the silence had ever failed. She thought about it carefully. Then she said, no. In every recorded instance, the silence had either preceded a decisive human military victory, or it had caused the opposing side to back down before a shot was fired. Briggs nodded once. He said nothing else for the rest of the meeting. At the end, he signed a single document. It was short. It was classified at the highest level the Earth Defense Force used, a level most of the people in the room had never seen applied to an active file before. The document was labeled Extinction Protocol, Level Omega. Its contents were not read aloud. They were not discussed. They were simply approved, sealed, and filed. The meeting ended. People left quietly. Meanwhile, in the neutral Velhari star system, a small, peaceful cluster of worlds that had stayed out of Drothari politics for generations by being useful to everyone and threatening to no one, a scholar named Pax Orvin was working at his desk. Pax Orvin had spent 19 years studying humanity, not their fleet numbers or their territorial claims, but their history, their literature, their decision-making patterns. He was considered eccentric by his peers, who thought human studies was a waste of a sharp mind. He had published 11 papers that almost no one in the conclave had bothered to read. He was working on a 12th. He titled it simply, A pattern of extermination, human silence as a pre-war ritual. He wrote quickly, without stopping, because the evidence was already assembled and had been for years. He submitted it to the Conclave High Council's General Advisory Board at 2 in the morning, tagged it urgent, and then made himself tea and sat by the window and watched the stars. He did not think Earth wanted a war. That was the part most people were going to miss. He knew from his 19 years of study that humans hated war more than almost any other species, because they understood it better than anyone. They had practiced it on each other for thousands of years before they ever left their planet. They knew exactly what it cost, but he also knew something else. He knew that when humans decided a war was unavoidable, they did not fight to make a point. They fought to make sure the war never had to be fought again. That distinction, he believed, was the most important thing in the galaxy right now. He hoped someone in power would read his paper before the Drothari fleet reached Earth's border. He did not expect they would. Back in Colorado, Jake Mercer started his second shift of the silence. The long-range sensors had picked up the Drothari fleet moving toward the solar boundary. 40 warships, in clean formation, massive and deliberate. Exactly the kind of show of strength that had made a dozen other species fold without a fight. Jake noted their coordinates in his log. He checked the time. He made a fresh cup of coffee. Outside, the Colorado sky was enormous and very blue. A hawk was circling slowly over the plains. It was a perfectly ordinary morning. The 40 Drothari warships arrived at the edge of Earth's solar system just before dawn, Colorado time. They came in slow and tight, in a formation that every species in the galaxy recognized. It was called the Reach, a wide crescent of ships that blocked the sky like a closing hand. It was designed to be seen. It was designed to frighten. It had worked every single time the Drothari had used it against every single species they had ever pointed it at. They held position just outside the solar boundary and waited for Earth to respond. The response they expected was the standard one: nervous transmissions, rushed diplomatic language, requests for talks, offers of concessions, some kind of signal that the planet below understood the situation and was ready to be reasonable. It was a script the Drothari had performed so many times it had become boring. They waited for 6 hours. Nothing came. Then, after 6 hours of complete silence, a single transmission arrived from Earth. It was text only. No images, no video, no audio. It was 7 sentences long. It came from the office of Nina Carr, Secretary General of the United Earth Government. It said, "You are within our solar boundary. You were not invited. You have 48 hours to withdraw your fleet. Earth does not recognize your formation as a lawful presence in this space. We will not be sending further communications on this matter. The boundary stands. The clock is running." That was all. No threats, no anger, no list of demands. Just 7 plain sentences and a clock. Commodore Droshek read the message 3 times. He had a bad feeling, the deep, cold kind that a careful soldier gets when something is moving in a direction they do not fully understand. He sent a private recommendation to the fleet's command channel, suggesting they consider repositioning outside the boundary, while requesting a formal dialogue. Nobody listened. The Emperor's orders were clear: advance, demonstrate power, force submission. It had worked before. It would work now. So the 40 ships began to move. They crossed the solar boundary at a slow, deliberate speed. They passed the outer planets. They moved through the dark space between worlds like 40 gray knives pushing through still water. And nothing stopped them, and nothing fired on them, and the silence from Earth continued. Some of the junior officers on the Drothari ships began to relax. Maybe it really was a bluff after all. Maybe the humans were just scared. Then the 12 Earth ships appeared. They came from 3 directions at once, not in a line. Not in any formation the Drothari tactical computers had a name for. They came in loose, scattered groups, and they were smaller than the Drothari expected. The largest of them was barely 2/3 the size of a standard Drothari cruiser. The sensor returns on their weapon loadouts looked wrong, not in a threatening way, just in a way that didn't match the standard classifications in the Drothari database. That should have been the first warning. The lead Earth vessel was a battered cruiser called the Steadfast. Its captain was Dean Holloway, a compact, quiet man in his mid-40s who had spent 20 years in deep space patrol and had the kind of unhurried confidence that came from doing dangerous work for a long time without dying. He stood at the front of his bridge and watched the Drothari formation on the main display with the same expression he used when reading a weather report. Behind him, at the weapons station, sat Mara Quinn. She was 26 years old, had been weapons officer on the Steadfast for 3 years, and had a gift for targeting geometry that her instructors at the academy had described as almost unsettling. She did not speak much. She was speaking even less right now, because she was completely focused on her screens. Holloway looked at the Drothari formation for a long moment. Then he said, quietly, that they were going to do this clean and fast. He told Mara to open with the communication array. She nodded once and fired. What happened next took 11 seconds. The Drothari fleet had a centralized communication array spread across 4 relay ships positioned at the corners of their formation. It was a standard design, efficient, well-protected, totally adequate against every weapon system in the Conclave's official registry. Mara Quinn was not using anything in the official registry. 4 shots, 4 targets. 4 relay ships lost their communication capability simultaneously. Not destroyed, disabled. The Drothari fleet went silent to each other in under 12 seconds. For a moment, nothing happened. The Drothari ships were still in formation, still moving, but they could no longer talk to each other across the fleet. Every captain was suddenly alone, on their own bridge, with no shared tactical picture and no way to coordinate. That was when the other 11 Earth ships started working. What followed was not a battle in any sense the Drothari would have used the word. It was a systematic, methodical, almost clinical operation. The Earth ships moved constantly, never in straight lines, always at angles the Drothari targeting systems found difficult to track, firing in patterns that seemed random until the effects made the pattern obvious. They were not trying to destroy the Drothari fleet. They were taking it apart, piece by piece, with great care. Weapons systems, navigation arrays. Each Earth ship seemed to have specific targets assigned in advance, and they hit those targets with a precision that left the rest of each Drothari vessel intact. They were not killing anyone. They were just making sure nobody could fight back or run away effectively. Droshek watched it happen from the bridge of his ship with a cold, sick feeling in his chest that he recognized from his readings as the specific emotion humans called dread. His own ship was hit twice, both times in non-critical systems, both times with a precision that told him the human shooting at him knew exactly what they were doing and was choosing not to do worse. That was somehow the most frightening part of all. He opened a channel, not to Earth, not to his own fleet. He reached out to the only person he could think of who might be able to explain what was happening in terms that made sense. He reached Pax Orvin on the Velhari network. He asked the scholar one question. He asked how to stop this. Pax Orvin was quiet for a moment. Then he said simply that you don't stop it. You survive it, if you are lucky. And then he said something else. He said that humans are not trying to destroy you. If they wanted to destroy you, you would already be gone. What they are doing right now is showing you the difference. Pay attention to that difference. It matters. Droshek closed the channel. He looked at his display. 31 of his 40 ships had lost at least one major system. Not one Earth ship had been hit. Not one. He gave the order to retreat. The Drothari fleet turned and moved back through the solar boundary in a broken, stumbling line that looked nothing like the clean formation that had arrived that morning. No communication array, reduced engine capacity, navigation systems running on backup power. They limped out of human space in a long, ugly column while 12 Earth ships held position and watched them go. Dean Holloway stood on his bridge and said nothing. He watched the last Drothari ship cross the boundary on his display. Then he turned to his crew and told them good work. That was all. Mara Quinn was already writing up her targeting report. She had not missed a single shot. She did not mention this. It was just her job. Holloway walked back to his command chair, sat down, and filed the after-action report. He marked the engagement type as Deterrence Operation Successful. Then he poured himself water from the small bottle on his console and went back to watching the solar boundary. The Steadfast held its position. The silence continued. The clock had expired. The Drothari were gone. Nothing more needed to be said. The news moved faster than the Drothari fleet could limp home. By the time the first broken warship crossed back into Drothari territory, the full story had already spread across every major news relay in the conclave. 40 ships had gone in. 40 ships had come back. But not the same 40 ships. They came back without working communication arrays, with engines running at reduced power, with weapon systems cold and dark. Not one of them had a scratch from a human weapon on the outer hull, because the humans had not hit the outer hulls. They had reached inside each ship, carefully and precisely, and removed only what was needed to stop the fight. It was the most deliberate display of controlled, targeted force most military analysts in the conclave had ever seen on record, and humanity had done it with 12 ships. In the halls and chambers and communication rooms of the conclave headquarters, the reaction was not celebration or mockery. It was something quieter and more complicated than either of those things. Species that had shared the conclave with humans for 80 years and had never paid them serious attention were suddenly pulling up every piece of data on Earth they could find. Trade ministers were calling their counterparts. Military advisors were sending urgent memos. The Velhari, who had always maintained a cautious respect for humans, were already drafting new diplomatic proposals. The Sarathi Commerce Guild, which had sent a meeting request to Earth 3 days earlier and received no reply, sent a new message immediately. This one was noticeably more polite than the last. Pax Orvin was the most requested speaker in the conclave for the first time in his career. Within 12 hours of the engagement, he had received 47 requests for interviews, briefings, and consultations. He accepted one, the formal summons from the Conclave High Council, which he had been expecting since he submitted his paper 2 days earlier. He packed a small bag, arranged for someone to water his plants, and traveled to headquarters. The council chamber was a wide, circular room with tiered seating and tall windows that looked out into open space. It seated 200 delegates. When Pax Orvin entered, every seat was filled, which had not happened at a general session in over a decade. He presented his paper without a long introduction. He simply explained what he had spent 19 years learning. He told them that human silence, specifically the kind of total and organized silence Earth had just demonstrated, was not a new behavior. It was a pattern that appeared consistently across human military history at moments directly preceding their most decisive engagements. He walked them through the historical record, in plain, calm language, the long, quiet periods before major offensives, the communications blackouts before surprise operations, the way human military and political leadership had historically used silence as both a tactical tool and a signal. He told them that the silence was not aggression. He was careful to say this clearly and more than once, because he knew it was the part people would struggle with most. The silence was preparation. It was the closing of doors and the drawing of breath before something very serious. And crucially, he said, it was also a warning. Not a spoken warning. Humans were not issuing ultimatums or publishing lists of grievances. The silence itself was the warning. To anyone who knew how to read it, it said, "We are ready, and we are giving you one last chance to stop before we begin." The Drothari had not known how to read it. Or perhaps they had known somewhere and had chosen to ignore what they knew because they had never been stopped before. High Chancellor Cervex, the aging leader of the conclave, sat at the head of the chamber and listened to every word. He was old, and had been in his position for a long time, and had survived by understanding which way the wind was blowing before anyone else did. He understood it now. When Pax Orvin finished, the High Chancellor asked only one question. He asked whether, in Orvin's professional opinion, Earth was finished with its silence, or whether it intended to continue. Pax Orvin thought about this carefully. Then he said that depended entirely on what the conclave did next. 3 days later, Nina Carr arrived at conclave headquarters. She had not announced the visit in advance. She simply appeared. Her shuttle docking quietly in the early morning, her small team of advisors stepping out behind her in plain gray coats, with no ceremony and no press. She was a tall woman with short dark hair and the kind of steady, unreadable expression that came from years of running a government of 8 billion people. She shook hands with the greeting staff at the dock and asked if the council chamber was available. It was made available within the hour. Her address to the full conclave was 7 minutes long. She did not begin by talking about the engagement at the solar boundary. She began by talking about Earth's history as a conclave member, the 80 years of minor status, of being tolerated but not respected, of having concerns dismissed and votes overruled by larger members. She spoke without bitterness, laying it out as plain fact, the way a person describes weather. Then she said that Earth had not asked for what happened, that the Drothari fleet had crossed a marked and recognized boundary without invitation and without legal standing, that Earth had responded with the minimum force necessary and had done so without killing a single Drothari crew member, a fact she wanted the chamber to sit with for a moment. She then placed a formal resolution before the conclave. It was called the Terran Sovereignty Accord. It proposed reclassifying Earth from a minor member state to a sovereign military power with full veto rights on all conclave security decisions. She gave the chamber 1 minute of silence after presenting it, which, given what silence had come to mean in the last week, felt very deliberate indeed. The vote was not close. High Chancellor Cyvrex supported it openly, and when the Chancellor moved, others followed. Species that had quietly resented Drothari dominance for years found the moment useful. The accord passed. Earth was reclassified. The resolution was logged and transmitted across every relay in the conclave network. Nina Carr thanked the chamber in 4 sentences, shook hands with Cervex, and left the same way she had arrived, quietly, without spectacle, as if she had simply attended a routine administrative meeting. Far away, in the Drothari Imperial Palace, the Emperor received the news in silence of his own. His senior generals were present. No one spoke for a long time. The political fallout from the engagement was already serious. Allied species were asking difficult questions. Junior commanders were being quietly reassigned. And the story of 40 ships limping home from 12 was circulating in every military academy in the known galaxy as a lesson in something, though different people were drawing different lessons from it. One thing was clear. A younger generation of Drothari officers, sharp, careful, serious readers, had been taking notes on humanity since the silence began. They were not angry. They were not making plans for revenge. They were pulling up human archives and studying them seriously for the first time in their careers, and arriving, one by one, at the same quiet conclusion. You did not want to be on the wrong side of a species that patient, that prepared, and that willing to show you mercy when it didn't have to. Back in Colorado, Jake Mercer sat at his station and watched the incoming transmissions begin to flow again. Not outgoing, incoming. The galaxy was talking to Earth now, with a new kind of attention. Trade requests, diplomatic proposals, data-sharing agreements, formal greetings from species that had never bothered before. He stamped them approved, one by one, filed them in the system, and refilled his coffee. Outside, the Colorado sky was turning orange at the edges. It was going to be a good evening. The silence was over. Earth had said everything it needed to say without using a single word. 6 months passed. The galaxy moved on the way galaxies do, slowly, noisily, with a great deal of talking by everyone about everything. New trade routes opened. Old agreements were renegotiated. Species that had spent decades deferring to Drathari preferences and conclave votes began making different choices. The political shape of the known galaxy shifted in the way that large things shift. Not all at once, not with a single loud crack, but gradually, like ice in early spring. Earth changed too, though from the outside it might not have looked that way. The streets of the cities were the same. The news channels covered the same mix of local arguments and small human dramas that they always had. People went to work, and came home and cooked dinner, and argued with their families over ordinary things. The extraordinary thing that had happened was understood by everyone, discussed by most, and then folded into the ordinary life of a planet the way all extraordinary things eventually are. But some things were different. Quieter things. Things in rooms that most people never saw. Mara Quinn's promotion ceremony was held on a Tuesday morning, aboard a military station in low Earth orbit. The room was not large. There were 12 people present, including Dean Holloway, who stood at the back with his arms folded and watched the proceedings with an expression of quiet satisfaction. The ceremony was brief. The admiral in charge read the promotion order, pinned the new rank to Mara's uniform, and shook her hand. There was polite applause. When Mara was asked to say a few words, she stood straight and looked at the small room and said simply, "We did what was necessary. Let's make sure it never needs to happen again." That was all she said. Then everyone went back to their stations because there was work to do, and the universe did not take days off. Holloway caught up with her in the corridor afterward and told her she had earned it. She said she knew, and smiled for just a moment, and then asked what her new assignment was. He told her she was getting her own ship, a newly commissioned vessel called the Resolute, not yet finished in the yards, but built with the same philosophy as the Steadfast. Fast, precise, loaded with systems that looked modest from the outside, and were anything but. She asked when she could board. He told her 3 weeks. She said that was fine. She had reading to catch up on. Cole Briggs retired on a Friday. He had served in the Earth Defense Force for 31 years, starting as a junior infantry officer before transitioning to strategic command. He had seen border skirmishes and diplomatic crises and the long, dull years between them. He was not a man who gave speeches or accepted dinners held in his honor, or allowed his photograph to be taken unless it was required by protocol. His last day of service was quiet. He spent the morning signing off on routine paperwork, the afternoon in a final debrief with his staff, and the evening clearing out his office. There was not much in it. He had never been someone who decorated. Just before he left, a young aide stopped him in the corridor. The aide was new, barely out of the academy, still with that particular look of someone who has studied everything and experienced almost nothing. The aide asked carefully whether Briggs could say anything about the document he had signed before the engagement, the one classified at the highest level. The aide did not say its name, but Briggs knew what they meant. Briggs looked at the young aide for a long moment. His expression did not change. Then he said, "It contained a reminder of what we are capable of. The point was to make sure we never had to use it." The aide waited for more. Nothing more came. Briggs picked up the plain bag he had packed his personal items in, nodded once, and walked down the corridor and out of the building into the bright afternoon. He drove home with the windows down. The road cut through open land, and the air smelled like dry grass and pine. He was not a man who felt things loudly, but there was something loose in his chest today that had not been there for a long time. Something that felt, if he was being honest with himself, like relief. He never spoke publicly about the document. Nobody who knew what it contained ever did. Dean Holloway's new assignment took him in the other direction, outward, into space that the Conclave had charted only roughly, where the maps got thin and the question marks got thick. His orders were peaceful. Survey, catalog, make contact where appropriate, proceed with caution. Standard first contact protocol. The kind of mission that took years and required patience above everything else. The Steadfast had been refitted for the journey. The crew was largely the same, supplemented by a team of scientists who brought equipment and questions and an infectious habit of getting excited about rocks. Holloway found this quality pleasant. It was good to be around people who were happy to be somewhere. They passed into unmapped space 3 months after the engagement. In the first new system they encountered, there was a civilization, small, early in its development, just beginning to reach for other stars. When the Steadfast made contact, the response from the alien ships was cautious but not hostile. They exchanged basic identification signals. They matched translation protocols. They began the slow, careful work of learning to communicate. In the second exchange, one of the alien commanders asked, through the newly established translation system, where the human ship had come from. Holloway gave the coordinates of Earth's solar system. The alien commander was quiet for a moment. Then the alien asked if that was the world that had gone silent. Holloway said yes. The alien said nothing for a few seconds. Then it said, "We heard about what happened. We had a long discussion about it. We decided if we ever encountered your people, we would try very hard to be friendly." Holloway smiled. He said that sounded like a fine arrangement to him. He invited them to open a formal dialogue. They accepted. It was, he noted in his log that evening, a very good start. The last light of that part of the story came from somewhere much farther away. A small patrol vessel in Drothari space, positioned far from Earth, near a cold and unremarkable stretch of border that had been assigned to it as a deliberate afterthought. A posting for people who were meant to be kept out of the way. A young Drothari soldier named Orek, the same intelligence officer who had started the Human Archive report 6 months ago and never quite finished it, was off duty in the crew quarters with a data terminal open on his lap. He was not reading military files tonight. He had closed those weeks ago. He was reading human literature. He had started with history, moved into philosophy, and arrived somehow at poetry, which had surprised him. He did not fully understand all of it. The imagery was strange, and the emotional logic did not always follow patterns he recognized. But there was something in it that he kept returning to, a particular quality he found in human writing that he did not have a word for in his own language. The closest he could come to it was something like the willingness to feel the full weight of something and still go on. He had read a poem written by a human soldier from the 20th century, someone who had seen a great deal of terrible things and had written them down with complete honesty and no self-pity. He had read it 3 times. It did not make him feel better exactly. It made him feel like the universe was larger and more serious than he had previously understood. He sat for a long time after finishing it. Outside the small porthole beside his bunk, the stars were very bright and very far away. The patrol route was quiet. There was nothing out here but space and time. He thought about what had happened at the solar boundary. He thought about 40 ships going in and 40 ships coming out, broken but alive. He thought about the fact that they were alive, specifically, that the humans had had the capability to do much worse, and had chosen not to. He had read enough history now to understand exactly how much worse it could have been. He thought about the silence that had started it all, 72 hours of a whole planet holding its breath, and he thought that he finally understood it in a way he had not before. They were not silent because they were planning destruction. They were silent because they were hoping, right to the last possible second, with everything they had, that the destruction would not be necessary. The weapon they had been most afraid to use was not in any file. It was not classified. It had no yield measurement and no delivery system. It was just the simple, stubborn, difficult human decision to keep the door open until someone walked through it or broke it down. He opened a new file on his terminal. He began to write, not a report, not an assessment, something else. He did not know yet what it was going to be. He wrote the first line and then stopped and looked at it for a while. Above his bunk on the small shelf where Drothari soldiers usually kept rank insignia and campaign medals, Auric had placed a single item. It was a printed page, a copy of the poem he had read 3 times. He turned back to his terminal and kept writing. The stars outside were cold and silent and very beautiful. And somewhere, 8,000 light-years away, a blue planet turned slowly in the dark, going about its business.